Good Thursday morning once again, Trinidad Tobago. Welcome back to Good Morning TNT for today, Thursday. Yes, heading back out to work could be quite difficult, I know, for many of us after prancing and jumping for 2 days and before that fretting for a whole weekend or possibly an entire week starting last week Monday. But you know what? Got to get back out to work. Just as hard as we party, we should be able to work just as hard. I know it's easier said than done in most instances, but please be careful if you're now heading out on the roads. Do your best at your jobs today. We'll be checking with many of the stakeholders as the morning progresses to give you updates on how they feel about their victories, including Chucky, who will be in studio, Ronnie and Caro, who topped the Downtown Band of the Year, as we suggested whilst on our broadcast on Carnival Tuesday, because of the impact they had on the Carnival stage, the Queen's Park Savannah stage. Well, back to the grind, which means back to the issues in Trinidad Tobago. One of the big issues in the last couple of weeks, 4 weeks or so, was the issue of what's being now called Westgate. Our guest is Attorney Martin George. Good morning.
All right. Good morning to you, Paul, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Considering you played last week, happy to have you here this hour of the morning. I knew it would happen Wednesday morning, but certainly Thursday morning. Now, going back, it's cost the AG his job. It's under investigation by the authorities. In the scheme of the legal frame of things, how big is this?
It's
the implications.
It's pretty big. It's pretty big because the point is your Attorney General is your third highest office in the land. So in a scenario where that person has to be asked to tender his resignation, then that is never something that you take lightly, particularly where you have circumstances where there are allegations made. Of course, they're just allegations, but if as a result of the allegations, which the Prime Minister described as very serious and troubling, you know, those were her words, then if in those circumstances you asked to resign, then it's not something anybody could ignore, and onlookers would be taking note of it.
But when we're looking at this, I guess from a dispassionate sense, there have been allegations before.
That's right.
How close did this come to compromising the office of the AG? Given, as you said, its significance as the third highest office in the country. In light of the fact that the allegations are being investigated, but they also involve another significant office holder being the director of the PCA, David West, and also the former Minister of National Security, who is also implying that there may have been some wrongdoing.
Yeah, I think the significance of the matter has been exacerbated by the parties and the players involved. In other words, this is not just an ordinary citizen writing a letter in a newspaper and complaining and saying, well, I don't like what this person is doing or that office holder is doing. You have a scenario where the primary complainant in the matter, which the police are investigating, is a senior office holder and one who has held a very senior post in the past, because remember, he was the director of the Central Authority. So the point is, it's not something that anybody could just brush off and ignore. Then, as you say, you add to the mix the fact that the former Minister of National Security appears to have his say on things. Of course, at the end of the day, they're all allegations, but when you look at the source from where it is coming, then of course it gives it greater precedence. And if the Director of Public Prosecutions has decided to institute, investigation, or the police commissioner has decided, look, an investigation is warranted, then of course that adds some level of concern that I think the Prime Minister had to take some action in the circumstances.
And the action was obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, to protect the integrity of the office of the AG.
Well, it's not just the office of the Attorney General, it's the country as a whole. Because you see, Paul, when you look at it, and this is a point I've made repeatedly, your Attorney General is supposed to be Attorney General for all of Trinidad and Tobago. So anything that affects negatively or impinges on the office of Attorney General, it affects Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not something you could ignore. No reasonable or rational person could ignore it.
And just going back to add clarity, the implications are that, or the allegations are that David West was a witness in the defamation case between the AG and Dr. Keith Rowley. Is that correct?
That's what, yes.
And the suggestion from David West's contribution is that his memory of the events are diametrically opposed to the information coming out from the AG when he made a statement on it.
Yes, that's what we
which
saw in
means
the
an
public
obvious
domain.
conflict into what happened then. When does it turn into that I say, you say? At what point? I guess when evidence to support either side is provided?
That is what I would imagine has to back it up, because in other words, the seriousness of the allegation is directly related to the level of proof you need to substantiate it. In other words, you cannot just make that statement unless you have something to back it up. It could not merely be my word against yours in a scenario such as that. Remember, once you talk in criminal matters, the law requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. This is not proof on a balance of probabilities where you're weighing the two sides, you know. You must be so overwhelmingly convinced that you are saying, look, beyond reasonable doubt, I am sure this happened. So the burden of proof really is always on the prosecution or the accuser or the police, who have to, you know, if they are deciding to lay a charge, they must have that evidence to back it up. We don't know what the evidence is.
And the Gary Griffith factor in this, in terms of the suggestion that, or the implication, which has now been denied, that someone was trying to get him to change his perspective, also, I guess, adds a certain level of conflict to this whole situation.
Well, it adds conflict, but it also, in one sense, adds corroboration to the allegation. But of course, corroboration, again, by itself doesn't mean anything unless you have some hard evidence. Because, in other words, just the very nature of the word corroboration, it means you are corroborating something. So there must be something substantive, which we are yet to know what it is. As I say, I cannot see things reaching this stage merely on you say, I say. It has to have something more than that to back it up and substantiate it. And then, of course, as I say, if you have corroborating evidence, then that is like your icing on top.
What are the implications of this? This is a criminal investigation, if I'm not correct.
Yes, yes.
So which means if it goes to that point, criminal charges can be laid. And if I'm not mistaken, criminal charges include attempting to pervert the course of justice.
Yes, that's what it appears.
Is witness tampering also part of it? Is there a charge for witness tampering?
I'm not necessarily sure that witness. I've heard the term bandied about in the public domain, but I'm not sure that it necessarily applies in this scenario, because this is really a civil matter. So the thing is, I think it's really more along the lines of maybe an attempt to pervert the course of justice. But of course, the police will be the best ones to say what
how serious a charge is that in any scenario?
It's not just the seriousness of the charge. You link it to two things. Number one, the legislation, which was recently passed, which was piloted by the Attorney General himself. And then you look at the level of the office holder. In other words, if I am basically like the guardian of the Constitution and the guardian of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, then certainly I could not be in any way implicated or, you know, charged for being a perverter of the course of justice.
It's an automatic conflict of interest.
That's right.
Can't
you
hold
know,
a position under those circumstances.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Now let's take this to two possible, or I guess three logical conclusions. The AG, the charges are laid. What does that mean then moving forward? I guess that the trial will take place, and evidence will be provided, or evidence would have been provided. Does the public comment on this, or the fact that it's such a public situation now with so many comments on it, have an implication for the outcome of the trial? Is this
not? I wouldn't say so at all, because at the end of the day, if you look at what happened, we've had a Chief Justice who was, slapped with criminal charges and brought before the courts, and I think our judicial system is robust enough and robustly independent enough to be able to meet whatever challenges and to be able to isolate and insulate itself from public comment on these issues.
And it goes to the next side, and the AG is exonerated. But the damage is already done to reputation.
Yes.
What happens in that sort of scenario? Can a civil case come out of this?
Well, I think certainly, because in other words, if it is that you have allegations which you are not able to prove, which have basically caused serious damage to someone's character, then of course they are able to, bring an action against you in that regard.
Given the public perception about this and the fact that the Prime Minister has already removed him from the position, do you see a scenario where he can possibly return to this job if he is exonerated, cleared of these allegations or possible charges?
I think it would be difficult in these circumstances, because one would always have the specter of persons in the public domain saying, well, you got away or you got off, so to speak.
But still Randolph implies I was guilty and I got off on a technicality,
Right.
but I was cleared and I was
Right.
exonerated
Okay.
for
Cleared,
something else.
exonerated. I think there would always be that cloud in terms of, well, there was this serious allegation. We don't know what happened, but okay, you are now exonerated. However, it raises, I think, too many uncomfortable questions going forward. I mean, if, in those circumstances, I can't see anybody wanting to go back in that position because it would always be an issue that persons can raise against you. And from even a government point of view, you wouldn't want something like that hanging over the head of your Attorney General, who has to go to meet with other attorneys general in the region, in the Commonwealth, all over the place. And, this stigma, so to speak, is still there. And that's the unfortunate thing about allegations in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's why I always say we must be very careful, when people are making allegations, that we don't then just take it as gospel and run with it, because we have that tendency in Trinidad and Tobago.
And if the AG is cleared, exonerated in this, what are the implications then for David West in this? Because it would mean that there was no supporting evidence, or enough supporting evidence to support his claim, which seemed counter to what the AG was saying in terms of his denials to this. Can he legitimately or perceptually hold on to that position as director of the PCA?
It does put him under the spotlight if that's the scenario. In other words, if it is that there is a complete exoneration, and if the police are able to say, well, look, having investigated it, we found no evidence to support it, then, of course, it puts you in a position where you really now have to come forward and justify and say, well, why did you make the allegation? So the thing is...
Is it only why did I make the allegations, or should I also now, is there a credibility factor over my head?
Of course there would be.
And should I keep my job as director of the PCA?
Of course there would be a credibility factor. Yes, and all those implications will flow. So that's why I tell you, the seriousness of the allegation is directly proportional to the level of proof you need to substantiate.
Now, there's a comment that you generally make, Martin George, about the institutions and the respect and integrity of these institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's irrespective of who's holding the office. How much do these scenarios damage these institutions in the public eye? Because many of these institutions depend on the public perception about them, on the integrity of them, on the public perception of the independence of them, and the unbiased nature of the office holders in them.
Well, Paul, as you say, it's a pet topic of mine, because you see, I think that we must always be able to look above and beyond the partisan politics and look at the bigger picture for Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, politicians come and go, and we as the citizens must remember that at the end of the day, our institutions are what keep us together as a nation. And we must always ensure that at all times you try, regardless of what an individual might do, that you don't damage the institution along with it. And sometimes it might require that in circumstances, and I hope